is sort of an introduction to very basic plant identification and how you, as a regular person, can help prevent the spread of aquatic invasive plants in the state of Maine. So thank you everybody very much, and we'll get started. So Lake Stewards of Maine, we are the oldest and one of the largest citizen lake monitoring programs in the United States. Our dates go back to 1971 within the Maine DEP. In 1996, we split off to a private nonprofit, which is how we operate now statewide. Each year, we provide training and technical support to thousands of community scientists across the state. And right now we have 1,200 certified lake scientists, regular people who are doing this, volunteering their time, monitoring over 500 lakes across the state. And through this project, these community lake scientists are the primary collectors of statewide lake data within Maine. So going into here, so we're going to start off with just what is an aquatic invasive species. Well, most of us know what an invasive species is. Of course, defined by the National Invasive Species Council, is an alien species whose introduction does or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. Aquatic invasive species are these plants and animals that are introduced to new environments from away, when they get put into a new body of water, they outcompete native plants and animals by not having any checks in the ecosystem, which would include things like native predators or disease in their new lake or water that they don't have. Aquatic species adapt and spread very, very quickly in new environments and can diminish and alter populations of native species. Now, just because a species is non-native does not necessarily mean it is invasive, but all invasive plants are non-native. Maine's native plants are really important. They protect our water quality, they enhance biodiversity and beauty of our lakes, they occupy areas of the lake that would otherwise be available to invasive plants, so the native plants are very, very important. And remember, well, just like terrestrial plants, there is a difference between an abundant plant and an invasive plant. Just because a plant isn't aesthetically pleasing to you or is growing in a place where you don't want it to be, doesn't mean that it's invasive. Remember, invasive plants are those plants, those non-native plants that are doing ecological, economic harm and harm to human health. So, because aquatic plants spread relatively unchecked in an ecosystem, they can alter the balance of those natural systems fairly significantly. Spreading unchecked can outcompete native plants, which it can decrease food stock for native plants and animals, changing the food web, removing key producers, can destroy habitat. They can also change water quality. Decaying mats of invasive plants can deplete dissolved oxygen levels, leading to further loss of plants and animals. Some invasive plants can chemically prevent other native plants from growing where they've spread. And invasive plants spread quickly and in some cases may be permanent. A population can double or triple in size within a year, and there are very, very few successful complete eradications of aquatic invasive species. Of course, there also affects Maine's economy. Maine's economy is natural resource based. A lack of diversity of plant life or water quality can, of course, depress tourism and recreation opportunities, swimming, boating, fishing, and property values can be affected as well. Lakes that have active infestations may be less desirable some for lakefront properties. Management, of course, is costly and difficult, and there are certain methods that may be further negatively impacting an ecosystem. And that funding can be hard to obtain due to high costs and the long scopes and uncertainty of management projects. So it can also pose questions to changing access to a lake. What if a lake wants to quarantine? What happens? The U.S. Coast Guard estimates that aquatic invasive species cost the economy as a whole around $5 billion each year. So they're a big problem and can severely impact the economic systems that surround our water bodies. We also have impacts on human health from aquatic invasive species. AIS can severely impact water quality, damage infrastructure. Some invasive plants can change water chemistry and outcompete natives, of course. Um, but really here, 50% of Maine people get their water from surface water sources, from lakes, ponds, reservoirs. So it's important that these waterways stay clean, productive, and accessible. Infested water sources may lead to higher processing costs for consumption, can damage infrastructure, intakes, filtration systems. So it's best to keep AIS out of the lakes. So how did aquatic invasive species get here in the first place? Well, it's important to know that aquatic invasive species are hitchhikers. Uh, AIS plants, aquatic invasive species plants, hop from lake to lake with aid of people. They hitch rides on boat trailers, on fishing gear, on engine props. Anything that you're putting into the water that can come in contact with plants can take plants out. So it's very, very important to make sure that you are removing plants when going from place to place when you're recreating in the lakes. This photo here was taken in 1999 on Lake Auburn, just down the road from our office, and you can see how stuck with plants this trailer is. It's absolutely crazy. And of course, Lake Auburn has a very big infestation with variable leaf water milfoil. Humans are responsible for about 80% of the spread through this method. This plants can also be spread through intentional releasing. Sometimes people dump out aquariums, or also through wildlife. A bird or an animal might eat a fruit from one plant and bring it someplace else. Moose have been known to move plants on their antlers, of course, so an aquatic invasive plant might move that way. So it's not just people that are moving these plants, but in 80% of the cases it is. And of course, it's not just your boats. Divers can be completely covered in this stuff too. This is Denise Blanchette, the Maine DEP in a hydrilla infestation. And many invasive plants produce through fragmentations, which means that they can break apart and those fragments can move to float to a new place and start growing as a new plant and clone itself. They can also reproduce, of course, through seeds sexually, but also through rhizomes, through stolons, through turions, through budding. This is one fragment of variable leaf water milfoil, which is the most common aquatic invasive plant in Maine. And a single frond like this can break into many, many pieces, which can each become a new plant. And it only takes a couple inches of each segment of this plant to break off and form something new. So there are now 15 plants on Maine's state watch list. The ones that are in the red boxes are the ones that are currently confirmed in Maine. This includes variable water milfoil, European water milfoil, parrot feather, which is a type of milfoil, spiny or brittle naiad, European frogbit, hydrilla, curly leaf pondweed, and swollen bladderwort. These plants, all of them are non-native. Most of them are native to Eurasia, but some of them are actually native to the United States, but have been misplaced and introduced in new places. Um, right now, we have the most common infestor in Maine is variable leaf water milfoil. Um, and more information will be provided on the fine identification characteristics in this presentation. This is last year's aquatic invasive species map for the state of Maine. There's about 40 infestations across the state right now. But this map is a bit outdated. The DEP has not released their map for this year, but there were a number of new infestations found last year. Out of over 6,000 lakes and ponds, however, between 40 and 50 infestations is less than 1%. That's pretty good, especially considering the rest of New England when you look at Massachusetts, Connecticut. So Maine is doing relatively well. However, it doesn't mean that AIS can't continue to spread throughout the state, especially as more people come here and recreate and our waters warm through climate change. All of these plants inhabit what's called the littoral zone. The littoral zone is usually from shoreline up to about 15 to 20 feet of water, depending on water conditions, where full spectrum sunlight can reach the bottom of the lake and plants grow. So the littoral zone is made of what we call three plant communities. There's the emergent zone, where plants are partially submersed, but mostly above the waterline, where they have wet feet, so to speak. There's the floating leaf zone, where the primary photosynthesizing leaves are held floating on the top of the water. Think of what we usually describe as lily pads. And there's also the submergent zone. This is where the plant is mostly or completely below the water. There may be occasional floating leaves, but they are not the primary photosynthesizing surfaces of these plants. And these plants all commingle at once. There's not clear lines that show where one plant community might start and end, but the littoral zone is a very productive habitat. We call it the fertile fringe because it's where most of the diverse biodiversity of the lake lives. Um, and note in this photo, you see submersed plants on the bottom. You see floating leaf plants that are stretching up to the top. So all of these different types are growing together to create this plant community. There's lots of place for fish and wildlife to hide and forage, and lots of microorganisms that keep the water healthy. So, going off of that quick introduction, we'll talk about identifying our plants by structure. So the first thing you do, say you're in the water and you find a plant, the first thing you want to do, just as you would with a terrestrial plant, is take a look at its overall appearance and think about what you see. Sometimes it helps if you find a plant to take it out of the water, take a sample and float it in a tray or a frisbee or something with some water so you can see the shape of the plant. But on take a note on this plant. It has large curly leaves that have a fold in the middle. It's sort of tan on top and green on the bottom. You can see that the leaves alternate up the stem. By understanding just general appearances to describe plants, you can become a better plant identifier. Identifying aquatic plants is not terribly different from identifying terrestrial plants. And if you can know the difference between, say, something like a maple leaf and an oak leaf, you can probably tell the difference between leaves of aquatic plants as well. So we're going to start talking when we're looking at a plant for the first time. First thing we're going to look at is our leaf arrangement. This is how the leaves are arranged upon a stem. So you might see opposite leaves. This is where you have two leaves growing from the same node on a stem, so they're symmetrical. They grow out completely opposite from each other in pairs. You might have alternating leaves or alternate leaves. This is where there's only one leaf coming out of the stem at a time from a node, and the nodes usually are growing on the opposite side and they're zigzagging up the stem. And the final arrangement is whorled leaf arrangement. This is where there's three or more leaves coming out from a single node, growing in a concentric circle around a stem. So remember this. The next are leaf shapes. So just as you would identify trees or garden plants that you can instinctively see based on by their general leaf shape, the same applies for aquatic plants as well. So here are different leaf shapes of plants that we're looking at. You could have an elliptical leaf, you could have a heart-shaped or cordate leaf, you could have a lance-shaped leaf, or a triangular, or a strap-shaped leaf, or a blade like a blade of grass. So all of these are different leaf shapes. Of course, the margins are important. When I'm talking about the margins, that's the edge of the leaf. So you can look at a leaf, you can pick it up, break it off to make sure to see if the margin is entire, meaning it's smooth all the way around, or if it's serrated, meaning it has super tiny little saw teeth. Sometimes these saw teeth are very, very small, and you may need magnification to see them, but usually they're visible to the naked eye. It depends on the plant. It also can depend on the time of year. So a magnifier is good to have when determining if a leaf is serrated or not. And there's also in the middle, we have our divided leaves. Our finely divided leaves break off into what look like little leaflets. They can be shaped like a feather. They can be shaped like a fork. They can be shaped like a branch. But all of these leaves look like they look as though you had a fleshy leaf, like a maple leaf, and an insect had eaten away all of the fleshy part, and all that was left was the veins. So in divided leaves, they might look like a little fork, they might look like a branch, like a tree branch, and they might look like a feather, where they have a single midrib with lots of little pins coming off the sides. When we're talking about feathered divided leaves, this is important. All of our plants called milfoils have true feather divided leaves. And so all aquatic plants, so all milfoils have feather divided leaves, and all aquatic plants with true feather divided leaves are milfoils. This is really important. Feather divided, again, means that it has one central midrib and then little pins coming off on either side. Those pins do not divide further. It's just one single one coming off. They're usually in pairs. So this is important to know. Feather divided leaves means milfoils. Milfoils aren't necessarily a bad thing. We have native milfoils in Maine, but I'll get to that in a moment. In a quick way to have a visual guide to knowing all of these different leaf shapes and determining leaf structure, what your plant might be, is this resource called a quick key. To use this, you don't need to know all about plants. You don't need to know really much other than using some deductive reasoning and following some prompts to see if a plant matches the simple descriptions to tell if that plant is suspicious or not. So this key will bring you through a series of steps that will help you determine if a plant resembles one of the 15 plants on Maine's watch list, but it will not tell you the identity of the plant if it is not one of those. So a lot of our invasives have very, very tricky native lookalikes, but using this key can help you key in and look for those differences and give you information on how to report a suspicious plant. And Casey has a link that she'll share that has this, if you're not familiar with this, that everybody can take a look at.
The link is in the chat.
Thank you, Casey.
You're
We
welcome.
also have these for download on our website, and we sell waterproof copies as well. But this is a very, very basic tool, and it's really easy to have in your back pocket, have it in your toolkit, have it in your tackle box when you go out on the water to quickly key out if a plant is suspicious or not. So with that out of the way, we'll get into the plants. So we're going to sort our plants by different growth patterns as they're arranged on the quick key. So the first is our floating leaf plants. Our first floating leaf invasive plant is yellow floating heart. Yellow floating heart it resembles our other water lilies, and but the distinctive things mostly is that it has divided branching stems. You can see in the drawing on the left, most of our native plants with heart-shaped leaves do not have divisions on the stems. So if you see a plant with heart-shaped leaves that has divisions on the stems where there's multiple leaves coming up from one stem, that's suspicious. Yellow floating heart also has a yellow flower that has ruffles on it that resembles a cucumber or a squash flower. And because they can bunch together, it may resemble a bouquet at the surface. The Petals are also serrated, so it can cause you can cause you to, if you take a look, you can see the little ridges on those flowers, and the margins of the leaves, of the floating leaves themselves, are scalloped and wavy. You can see that there. Our next floating leaf plant that's invasive is our European frogbit. This one is found in Maine. I should mention, yellow floating heart was currently found in Maine, but the infestation has been eradicated. So that is a success story. Going to European frogbit. What makes this is another plant with heart-shaped leaves. The margins are smooth on this one. What makes this one unique is that this plant doesn't root to the substrate like yellow floating heart does, where you have a stem that goes to the bottom. This one floats at the top in a little floating rosette or a whorl. And those little floating colonies can be linked together through stolons. So making like a chain, a daisy chain of plants along the surface. The heart-shaped leaves have a very, very distinct venation pattern. They're concentric circles, and none of our other heart-shaped leaf plants look like this. So you can see that picture in the center. The flowers are three-petaled in white with a yellow center, and they're often found in little clusters. So that's another thing to look out for, these little clusters of flowers. And in that photo on the left, you can see that sort of floating bouquet of how this plant grows. Our next floating leaf plant is giant salvinia. Giant salvinia is native to South America and is now found all over the world, including Africa, Europe, and the United States, but is not yet found in Maine. This plant is an aquatic fern. It's not a vascular plant, um, or it is a vascular plant, but is a fern, and it floats freely on the surface. So it remains buoyant and floats on the water with these, on the drawing on the left, you can see these little thingies hanging down. Those are what we call sporocarps. Uh, those are the spore producing surfaces on the plant because it is a fern. Um, it also has free floating root-like structures. You can see on the picture on the bottom right. Um, a distincting feature about this plant, the leaves have fine hydrophobic hairs. So you can kind of see on the photo on the top right, water will bead on the surface of this plant. And this plant can break and spread through fragmentation as well as through spores, and is a very, very fast grower. The picture on the lower left shows a floating mat of this plant, and a floating mat of giant salvinia can double in size every 2 days. It grows very, very fast. But this one is not yet in Maine. The farthest north this plant is located in the US right now, I believe, is Virginia, at least on the East Coast. And our next invasive floating leaf plant is our water chestnut. So water chestnut is native to Eurasia and is very, very invasive in North America. It's across all of New England, but not yet Maine. So we are right on the edge of this one, but it's a huge problem in Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York. Floating leaves are very distinctly arranged in a rosette. You can see the photo on the bottom right. They have that concentric layout of a rosette, and they are triangular with serrations on two edges. The leaves also have a bladder on the petiole. The petiole is the leaf stem that connects the leaf to the rest of the plant, and it has an inflated petiole that helps it float. The plant roots to the substrate, but it has the submersed leaves are a different shape. They're not triangular. They're actually divided and sort of wispy. You can see it on the picture on the drawing on the left. And this plant is an annual and it reproduces by seed. It's not a perennial, but those seeds produce quickly and the plant can start dropping seeds in spring. The plant seeds can sink to the bottom and carried by the current and brought to new places. and they can also get caught on um, boat bunks, on carpeted bunks. They can get caught in fishing nets. They have these little sharp spines that act as Velcro and stick to things. There are two invasive species of water chestnut. We have Traponitans and Trapobispinosa, and they are distincted by the shape of their nut. There's the one, the picture on the lower left is Traponitans. The Trapobispinosa looks more like a bat or the Batman logo. And that plant is also an invasive. All right. We're now going to go on to our plants that have submersed, finely divided leaves. So remember, these are plants that the leaves are below the surface of the water and are finely divided, which means that they're branched or forked or feather divided. The first one is variable leaf water milfoil or variable water milfoil. So this is by far the most common invasive in Maine. So it's important to know that this is a milfoil. It has feather divided leaves. This milfoil is one of our milfoils that flower above the surface. Milfoils can be further divided into groups by those that flower above the surface and ones that flower below the surface. In two, we have all of our invasive milfoils in Maine flower above the surface. Um, Now, this plant, you can see on the right side, that that photo here, that is the flower stalk. Those leaves that stick up above the water are the flower bracts. Those are the leaves that attend. There's little flowers at the end of them. And those leaves are undivided, so they're not feather divided and they have fine serrations on them. The leaves themselves, the submersed leaves, are packed in very, very tight whorls and have this sort of distinct, because of they're packed together, they have sort of this distinct rocket ship or bottle brush shape, as you can see in the center photo. In some places in Maine, variable leaf water milfoil has a red stem, this bright red stem you can see in these two pictures, but this is not a true indicator as this plant can vary, and there's a lot of places where it has a green stem as well. And this plant also it grows very, very quickly and very, very fast, can fragment and make new plants. It can also spread the rhizomes. And a curious thing about this plant, how else it will spread, is it can spread as a terrestrial morph as well. So if this plant gets onto shore and gets stranded, it can actually do just fine. It'll make these little pine tree-like structures that you can see. There's an arrow pointing one on the side here, where they can remain. Right here, it's in the crack between some rocks. They can be quite happy until the water rises again and they can start growing, which is very, very sneaky. Variable water milfoil also, like many milfoils, can hybridize. And there are a few lakes in Maine that are infested with a hybrid milfoil, which is a cross between variable water milfoil and comb water milfoil, Myriophyllum laxum. The hybrids in Maine for this one are completely red, which is wild. It has a red stem and red leaves. It does not flower in Maine, but when it does flower, the flower stalk on the right, you can see here, is rather unusual. It's a very strange looking plant. Eurasian water milfoil is our next milfoil. This is it's native to Eurasia. Eurasian water milfoil is very, very invasive across the Northeast. In all of New England, it's the most common aquatic invasive, with the exception of Maine, where variable is the most common aquatic invasive. It's currently only managed in Cobbessy Lake, and there are other infestations in the state that have been treated with early detection and rapid response, and it's been eradicated. This plant has feather divided leaves, which almost always appear in groups of four. Those leaves can be fairly widely spread along the stem compared to variable water milfoil. And there's a significant gap, sometimes up to an inch or a couple inches. And the leaves have a relatively high number of leaflet pairs. So the drawing that you can see on the left there, those little leaflet pairs, the little feather pins that are coming off the center rib, as a relatively high amount compared to other species of more than 12 of those pairs, so 24 little pins. And those leaves have a snubby little flat end that looked like it was given a haircut with a pair of scissors. So it has this little flat edge to it. If you lay it out, if you take off a whirl and look at it from overhead, you can see it. Um, it has a variable colors. The flower stalks that you can see, the photo second from the right has one group of plants where there's a white, a pink, a red. So they look almost like rainbow chard. They're actually very pretty. But the difference between this one and variable water milfoil is that the flowers are larger than the bract leaves. The flowers are these little dots that you see coming up the stem. The leaves, the bracts, are very small. And you can see in the photo on the right, there's some of those flowers in bloom, which are very pretty. Okay, our next milfoil. This is parrot feather. Parrot feather is a milfoil, even though it's not called parrot feather milfoil. It is. It has a true feather divided leaf. Um, this plant was in Maine. It was in one private pond, but it has been contained and eradicated, which is another success story, which is really great. So this plant has a distinct thing about this plant is the flowering stalk is this very, very bright bushy thing that sticks above the surface. You can see the picture on the right. These bracts are very, very big and they look just like bird feathers, like a parrot's feather. They look fluffy. This plant is very tough and fibrous, um, and it is bright electric green. Those whorls of leaves typically grow in groups of 4 to 6, and they have this that sort of long, skinny shape. It has submersed leaves, but they're very sort of wispy and wimpy. They're not as robust as the flowering stalk leaves. Um, in Maine and actually in the US, all of our parrot feather has propagated through root division and fragmentation, even though the plant can flower and does produce seeds. In the United States, all of the plants that are in infestations are male plants. So they've all cloned themselves. It creates these really thick mats along the surface, which dangers animals through entanglement and can damage boats and bad for swimmers. So this is a rather nasty plant, and it is a true invasive all over the world. This is a major problem in Europe and other places. Here's a mat of parrot feather, a colony of parrot feather. Here you can see all those bright green leaves poking above the surface. Okay, so we're getting out of the milfoils. Our other submersed, finely divided invasives. So this is fanwort. Fanwort leaves are branch divided, so they look like a tree branch. If you look at the photo on the top right, you can see that the leaves grow oppositely. They're always, always, always opposite. They're not in whorls, they're always in pairs, and they're not alternating. That's important. It's also important to know that this plant gets its name because those leaves look like little fans. If you think of that, if you look at that photo on the top right, you can see there's an extended petiole. Whoops. There's an extended petiole that goes from the center of the stem out to the rest of the leaf. Think of that as the handle on the fan. So it connects to the branch divisions on the rest of the leaf, and they're always arranged in opposite pairs. It has floating leaves. On the photo on the bottom right, you can see the blue arrow pointing to it. That looks like they're little sickle-shaped leaves that float up to the top, but they only do that when they're attending emergent flowers. This plant is not yet in Maine, which is good. It is a major problem across the rest of New England. There was a close call with this plant last year, but thankfully was not found to be introduced to the lake where there was a fragment found on a boat trailer. So our next submersed, finely divided invasive plant is swollen bladderwort. Swollen bladderwort is a bit of a controversial plant. It's native to the lower United States, but it's declared invasive and found in places where it's been introduced, including New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, it's not officially declared yet. In Vermont, I'm not sure if it is yet there, but the plant is there and it's being studied. This plant, when introduced to a new body of water, can outcompete other bladderworts. Bladderworts are free-floating carnivorous plants. They're very, very cool. I encourage everybody to learn more about bladderworts. Um, but they'll float near the surface in the spring and they will sink to the bottom later in the year. They make these floating flowers you can see in the top left that are very large. They have this sort of wagon wheel shape of inflated tentacles that float on top at the end of the plant, and that from there becomes a small bunch of little yellow snapdragon-like flowers. The plant can grow to be very, very big and bushy. The foliage itself can be 4 to 10 inches across. It can be huge. New growth sometimes has a purple color and can look like a really dense, kind of chaotic mat of vegetation. Um, in Maine, those yellow blooms have been observed in late spring, in midsummer, and early autumn, but it changes based on the host climate. And this plant also has, when comparing to other bladderworts, the bladders appear to be randomly scattered all over the leaves, but we will go into, you can go into further explanation of determining the difference between bladderworts and some other resources I'll talk about later. But just know this plant is being found in a lot of places. Last year, it was found in about 5 lakes. The previous year, it was found in 3, I believe. So it's now in 8 or 9 lakes across the state, including some longtime infestations. So this plant is popping up. It's mostly in southern Maine, but there are infestations in central Maine as well, where it's been introduced in recent years. So this is one you're going to be hearing a lot about and in future years as people know how to look for it and find it. So we're next going on to our submersed blade or strap-shaped leaves. Remember, these are plants that are below the water, that are blade or strap-shaped and not finely divided. So first one is curly leaf pondweed. Curly leaf pondweed is a pondweed. We have a lot of native pondweeds. They're really, really beautiful and diverse group of plants, but this one is invasive. This one has an alternate leaf arrangement, so they zigzag up the stem. And this plant, everything you need to know about identifying this plant, you can get from one leaf. That drawing on the left side and the photo next to it shows that curly leaf pondweed have this sort of window pane stained glass look to them, where they have a outer vein that goes along the inner edge of the leaf that encases these horizontal veins that connect to it that make sort of this window pane stained glass pattern. You can see it if you hold it up to the light. The margins of the leaves are serrated, and they also have this sort of lasagna noodle shape to them. They're curly. They look like the edges of lasagna after you've boiled them and you take them out. So that's all distinct right from one leaf. You don't need to see the rest of the plant. Um, in Maine, this plant produces through asexually through turions, which in the photo in the top right are these sort of hardened vegetative structures that produce to clone itself. So, and it can also produce by seeds. If it does produce a seed, that little drawing on the right shows the seed. It looks like a woodpecker's skull. But because this plant could reproduce with turions, it has sort of a leg up on native plants. Um, the plant will end its growth cycle. It'll grow all winter, It'll end its life cycle by June when it releases its turions. Turions then go to the bottom of the lake. They get started, they start growing again in fall. So this plant sort of has a different growth cycle than many other plants. So it changes the time of year when one you can find this plant. You're only going to find it really in the spring, and when you can manage it as well. Oops. Next, we have brittle naiad, also known as spiny naiad, brittle water nymph, or European naiad. So naiads, we have a number of native naiad species in Maine. They're really cool plants. They have variable leaf arrangement, which means that you might have opposite leaves, you might have alternate leaves, you might have whorled leaves. They're kind of all over the place. They make these little bushy little clusters all on one plant. The leaves are very fine and they have prominent serrations. Especially later in the season, the serrations are more visible and the leaves might take more of a recurve shape to them. Where the leaves meet the stems, there's sort of a blocky leaf base. In the drawing on the bottom right, you can see that in the photo above it, that sort of block shape where it connects and it wraps around the stem. And each one of those leaves in that little blocky leaf base can hold a flower, which can create a seed, and it can spread very quickly. This is another true annual plant, and it's called brittle naiad because if you touch it when it's flowering, it'll explode and it'll send those little seeds all over the place. So this is another invader that's in Maine, so keep an eye out for this one. Hydrilla. So hydrilla is one of the most invasive plants in the world. It is everywhere. It's native to Eurasia. It grows extremely fast. It can tolerate a wide range of habitats. It propagates by clonal expansion through turions in tubers. The photo on the bottom right shows a tuber. They're about the size of a pistachio nut. You can see one next to a penny there. Um, they love low light and difficult conditions that other plants might have trouble growing in, so they can spread undetected. This is a major, major problem in lower New England in the Connecticut River watershed. You may have heard of Connecticut River hydrilla. Um, the leaves are arranged in whorls, remember groups of three or more, and usually in groups of 4 to 8. And those leaves themselves are serrated. So if you pick off those leaves from those whorls, you'll see serrations. Um, and this plant again can stand extreme conditions and ice and all sorts of stuff. It can spread through fragmentation, through turions, through tubers. It can spread by waterfowl. It can spread by boat traffic. So this plant is very, very aggressive. So keep an eye out for this one. Remember, whorls of more than three, 4 to 8 usually, and serrations are the key features for this plant. We have another world plant. This is Brazilian Elodea, which is not one of our native Elodias. In fact, it's not an Elodea, it's an Egeria. But this is one of the plants that's an escaped aquarium plant. It's native to Brazil, as the name implies, but it's spread to almost all the United States, but not yet in Maine. It can grow in dense mats or rooted strands. It has slender blade-shaped leaves that grow in a whorl, usually of 4 to 6, but the leaves are smooth. They're not serrated. So remember, look for leaves of more than 3 and smooth. Our next one is starry stonewort. Starry stonewort is actually a macroalgae, not a true vascular plant. It has distinct branching at nodes. Each one of these little branchlets is actually one elongated cell. It's a weird plant. It's an algae. It mimics other native plants, other native stoneworts, which are so it could be easily confused if it's not it doesn't have reproductive structures. The reproductive structures though are those white star-shaped things called bulbils, and those break off and let a new plant grow. And if you feel it, the plant feels kind of goopy and spongy, and the little bulbils feel calcified and hardened. It's a very strange feeling. I got to feel some in Connecticut a few years ago. Very, very interesting plant. Thankfully, not yet detected in Maine, but it is a growing threat across the Northeast and in the Great Lakes. Okay, We have only a little bit of time, so I have to get through the rest of this. Our blaze-shaped leaves in a basal rosette. So we have one plant in this group. That's water soldier. Water soldier grows as an emergent plant or a submersed plant in a basal rosette. The leaves are stiff and stand freely, and they have very, very prominent serrations along the edge, like an aloe plant. If you touch it and you're not paying attention, it can cut you. It's really sharp. We had some samples last year, and I think I nicked my finger on them every time I took them out of the cooler. They have emergent flowers that are white with a yellow center with three petals. And this plant can spread through roots and stolons and it can crowd out other plants. A curious thing about this plant is that if conditions are right, it will break off from its root structure and it will freely float on the surface of the water and it'll float to a new place and grow somewhere else. So that photo on the bottom right shows those free floating water soldiers at the top of a pond in Ontario. So this is a weird, weird plant. If you come out to some trainings this summer, we'll have some samples of this one. It's wild. This one is not yet in Maine. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what you can do. Maine has a 3-point AAS action plan to stop the spread of aquatic invasive plants, which includes what we call prevention, early detection, and rapid response. And for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to focus on prevention and early detection. So prevention. Prevention means physically stopping plants from entering your lake. So first thing you can do is remove all plants, mud, and foreign debris from your boat, trailer, and equipment between trips, before and after every trip. This means checking your rollers, your bunks, your axles of your trailer, your props, your fishing gear, everything that has plants on it. Take a look closely and remove it. If there's a courtesy boat inspector at your lake, they can help you and remove stuff. And before or after, always visit the courtesy boat inspector. Be nice to them. They have to talk to a lot of people and stand in the hot sun all day. They have a hard job to do, but they're there to physically prevent plants from coming in or out of the lake. In Maine, there's also a law that was passed in 2023 that requires you to do this anyway, and you cannot bring transport plants on public roadways. So you must clean, drain, dry before and after you must clean, drain, dry after launching. Make sure that you're not bringing anything in. And that means draining ballast. It means visually inspecting, disposing of plants, not releasing any live bait. Portable garden sprayer with a 2% bleach solution is a great way to quickly clean your boat. Um, Pull out your drain plugs, whoops, and make sure that everything is nice and dry before you bring it somewhere else. Now, early detection. Early detection is where you come in, and that's what we're talking about here. It's LSM's Invasive Plant Patrol Program, or IPP program. Because prevention doesn't always stop the spread of invasive plants, early detection is getting people out and actively looking for invasives to find something if it's already been established or if something becomes established when it pops up. Our IPP volunteers are key in early detection monitoring across the state, and IPP volunteers have discovered many of the infestations in Maine. They work as volunteers and coordinate efforts from both LSM as well as regional groups, regional conservation groups, land trusts, all sorts of things to get people out working with teams and making a big difference by keeping an eye on our lakes. They work with their community, they work with their town governments, they work with realty groups and fishing clubs and schools, and really have a statewide or just lake-wide group of people who are interested in looking at this, looking in lakes and looking for plants. So early detection is key. IPP volunteers are the most important factor in early detection. Over 5,000 people in Maine have been trained as invasive plant patrollers since 2002, since LSM's AIS program began. And those people go out and regularly survey and look. When IPPers or IPPers report when they find a plant that's suspicious using their quick key or using some other guides. They report them to LSM. LSM, if it confirms it's invasive, will tell the state to get cross references, and the plant is confirmed to be invasive. Then a rapid response occurs. We'll talk about rapid responses in other trainings. We don't have times today, but it's that early detection of physically finding the plants that is key to stopping bigger infestations. And the best part is anyone can do it. Anybody can become an IPP or an IPPer. After they trained, they comb the lakes, they comb the littoral zones using their knowledge. They start with what they know, and they know their lakes. Uh, Knowing where to start can be tricky, but if you're just getting started, start with what you know. Start small. If you have a camp, start from your camp. If you like to, you don't have to live on a lake to do this. If you're a fisherman and you like to go to a fishing spot, you don't have to tell us it's your favorite fishing spot, but you can tell us it's a place that you like to go and patrol. You can go at a boat launch and check out there. High traffic areas are the most at risk for new infestations. You don't need a ton of gear. A pair of polarized sunglasses helps. All you really need is a clipboard and a data form. A rake helps, maybe a dry bag, some snacks, some water, but you don't have to do it with a lot of equipment and you don't have to do it alone. So again, start small. Eventually, once you get comfortable, you can go big and do a bigger survey. Um, we have maps on our resource website, lakesofmaine.org, and you can find maps that will show you the layout of the lake, and you check out the depth. You can see where the littoral zones are, and that can help you get started too. So let's say you found something. What do? Well, or you found a suspicious plant, this should say. Now what? Well, what you should do is you should always mark it down where you found it. Use a marker buoy with a number code on it that says your phone number or says suspected invasive plant or the name of your team. That's an important thing to know. Piece of pool noodle tied to a piece of rope with a brick on the end makes a perfect anchor. And try to collect a specimen. And don't try to remove the whole plant out of the substrate. And if you do grab a piece, watch for free-floating fragments. And then you can submit it to LSM so we can take a look at it. You can even mail us specimens, put it in a double seal in a plastic bag with water, and send it to us in a sturdy box. We'll take a look at it and tell you if we can tell what it is. Don't just put it in a paper envelope. It goes through the rollers. It'll squish and it'll look like this in our mailbox, and I don't want to have to clean it out. But the most important thing that IPPers can do is submit their data. Every survey they do, IPPers fill out this little form that we have on our website. We'll send out. They'll be ready later this spring for this year's form. This says who you are, where you've been, where you're going. This is our documentation form. This is the wrong image. But when you're going out, there's forms that you can fill out that have all of your information, where you've been, what the water conditions are like, if you found anything, and more importantly, if you didn't find anything. If you volunteer and go out and don't write anything down, we don't have any record that you were out and that you've been monitoring that lake. So somebody says, I want to get involved on Norton Pond. Is there anybody involved? And I look at the database and says, no, nobody's submitted data for that lake. So it's important that after your surveys, you fill out a survey form and you tell us that you were there. And you can submit those online, or you can submit those through an app called Survey 123, which I'll talk about in another training. But just letting us know that you're out is extremely helpful. We have our resource website, Lakes of Maine. All of that data that those volunteers submit end up here. This has not just AIS data, but also our water quality data as well. And it's a great resources for everybody, for citizen scientists, for fishermen, for researchers, even just knowing where boat launches are or places around lakes. This is a great website where you can find tons and tons of data on your lakes. We have more resources. We have a field guide with an added supplemental booklet to cover some more plants. We do live plant ID workshops, IPP 101, plant ID workshops. We have lots of things that we can do. And we also certify our volunteers. We have a 3-tier certification system. Right now, we're focusing on tiers 1 and 2. But what we do through trainings is people can sign up to be certified. This lets us know that we have a degree in confidence in how they're doing and what they know. So when they submit their data, we know what courses they've taken and their level of training. If you want to help out beyond your home lake, which some people do, I'm sure we have some in our audience right now. I can't see your faces, but I'm sure we have some dedicated travel team members in here. Travel team members are huge. What they do are volunteers who've reached out beyond the borders of their home lake, and some of them don't even live on lakes. Some of them just like to help out in general, who want to travel the state and help us with this effort. They're very, very integral in what they do. They're a true community of scientists and fun people who want to do good, learn about plants, and see some incredible places across Spain. They assist with rapid response surveys. So if an invasive is found, they go on longer survey trips. This year, we're doing 2 longer survey trips up at Big Lake in late June, up in the Island Falls area, which will likely be in August. Dates of those are still being determined, but we rely on volunteers to help us with those survey efforts. And they also are great advocates for what LSM does, helping form new teams, spreading information about AIS, meeting with local constituents. And we are always looking for travel team members. So if you're interested, let me know. We have a number of webinars on these subjects on AIS coming up this spring. IPP 101 is a very complete crash course in this stuff. It's sort of an expanded version of this presentation. That's going to be on April 30th at 9 a.m. We also have these other programs, Survey 123 for IPPERS, manual control methods, as well as our travel team orientation webinar. We also have a number of webinars on specific plants. So this is uh, in-depth webinars on groups of plants, including bladderworts, milfoils, naiads, floating leaf plants, with more to come this year, which I'm very excited about. And we have, of course, our in-person trainings, our in-person workshops. We have plant paddles, where we physically bring people onto a lake and show them the plants that grow in their lake. We collect samples and we key them out using the quick key. And we also have live plant IDs. This is where we bring around 40 different species of plants to a community space where we allow people to pick up samples, look at them, and learn how to use a field guide and more finely identify those plants. These are hosted all over the state. In 2025, we're going to be holding about 15 of them, including one that's going to be co-sponsored by all of the co-sponsors of this program. Up in Piscataquis County. So there's going to be a schedule of these being released probably by mid-late February, once we get some key survey dates out of the way and we can schedule everything else. And remember, LSM is always here to help. If you need help getting started, organizing volunteers, seeing who in your area is a volunteer that you can work with. You want more plant resources, you want to get involved in our water quality program or help out other ways, or need to know some other groups or conservation groups, let us know. That's what we're here to do. And of course, Lake Stewards Maine is a volunteer supported nonprofit. So if you're interested in donating, we always appreciate your support. We have a little QR code here. Your donations make it possible for LSM to continue to provide these services for free to the people of Maine, to provide these trainings for free. So thank you very much. You can speak with me further afterwards if you'd like. And with that, are there any questions?
Thank you, Brett. I didn't see any questions in the chat, just letting you know.
Great.
And I just want to reinforce what Brett mentioned already. So the Sebec Lake Association, Lake Stewards of Maine, Piscataquis Soil and Water Conservation District, Friends of Wilson Pond, and the Moosehead Regional Land Trust are going to be collaborating on bringing you all a live plant ID workshop this summer. And everybody who has signed up for this webinar will make sure to get that information out to you when we've set the date. But we're leaning towards holding it in Monson, which is a little more centrally located for the county. So we'll make sure to connect you all with that information once we have it.
Great. And I know this was a ton of information. We have a lot more in-depth trainings that are coming up and resources online. So I know it's a lot to take in, but everybody starts with something small, so and everybody has something to contribute. So if you want to learn more, come to one of our trainings, take some of the webinars, and we're going to be scattered all over the state. So it's likely we can find a training near you where there is.
And Marty, if you're on the call, I don't hope you saw that it looks like the Lake Stewards website is where you can record that water quality data. So that's what I was looking at for you. Okay. I'm not seeing any questions.
Great.
All
Well,
right.
thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. We have a lot more programs coming up, so if you want to learn more, I look forward to seeing you in future webinars. And maybe we'll see you at a training or out on the water this summer. So thank you very much.
Thank you again so much, Brett.
All right, take care, all.
Thank you again very much, Brett. It was
No,
great.
I
Much
think I got it.
appreciated.
I think I got it in right under the wire.
You did great. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Okay, bye.